Hi, folks. Welcome to the Fivetran Data Podcast. I'm Kelly Coleffel, your host. On the show, we bring you insights from top experts across the data community. We cover AI, machine learning, enterprise data, analytics, and much more. Tim Vail is a principal at Two Bear Capital, focused on identifying new technology-focused investments, advising existing portfolio go-to-market teams, and supporting Two Bear's data, analytics, and enablement efforts. Prior to joining Two Bear, Tim was the VP of Solutions Engineering and Enablement at StarTree, a real-time analytics platform. And before this, he was head of sales engineering at Cockroach Labs, creator of CockroachDB, a cloud-native distributed SQL database. Tim, it is great to see you. Welcome into the show.
Hey, Kelly. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat today.
I am as well. We've had a chance to catch up a little bit over the last few months, so this should be a lot of fun. And you've had a lot of experience, a lot of different, I'm guessing, lessons that you've learned over your time at these organizations, and would love to hear how some of those lessons could help inspire data leaders today across different industries. Why don't you give us a quick overview of your background? I dug into it a little bit, but a little deeper dive, and then your current role.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I started really writing code for a living. So, I consider myself kind of a software engineer by trade, and kind of rose up through the ranks doing a whole bunch of different kind of development, primarily using Java, but really all sorts of other languages. Did a number of different kinds of engineering leadership roles, and ultimately decided at some point, and I'm glad I made this decision, to kind of jump to the dark side and move away from kind of writing code for a living and actually trying to sell the things that I was building. And so, as you correctly pointed out, in my background was sales engineer as my first job, kind of away from professional engineering, and then, rose up through the ranks and ultimately leading sales engineering organizations, which ultimately brought me to where I am today, which is at Two Bear Capital. Two Bear Capital is a venture firm that focuses kind of on the intersection of life sciences and technology. And I'm helping support the technology investments at Two Bear Capital. So an interesting journey, but I think the highlight being, really grew up writing code for a living. And to the extent that I can, I try to do it nearly every day. I really enjoy being very close to technology and writing software to this day. So
I've had a number of conversations recently about software engineering today and how that's even changing so quickly. Let's say you're starting today as a software engineer, you're wanting to get rolling, what would you do differently than what you may have done years ago when you started?
Gosh, the whole world has changed, hasn't it? Just in the last couple, I almost want to say months. It's obviously been a lot longer than that, but you can see behind me, at least for those of you on video can, I've got a ton of books, and that's how I learned. I used to, I remember this distinctly. I remember, trying to teach myself the Java programming language, and sitting in front of, Java for Dummies or one of these books, and kind of pouring through on how to write things. And that was tough. It was a really tough way to get started. And it amazes me the amount of information that people have at their disposal today with AI and other things. We could probably spend an entire podcast alone just talking about, how AI can accelerate software development. But I do still think there's tremendous value in really learning these things the hard way. And by the hard way, I mean not only reading and absorbing the knowledge, but actually writing code. I think that's a really important thing. As AI gets more and more powerful, I think there's an opportunity for AI to do more and more of the development for you, just more and more of the thinking for you. And I think that might be unfortunate. If I were coming up in the software engineering world, I think I'd want to still focus on learning and doing things the hard way.
Yeah, there's such an emphasis now on being really, really good at prompt engineering and kind of getting there quicker if you can.
Yes.
I think, data engineer, software engineer, anything that's working with code, I think, if you're doing that full time, there's a need to kind of rethink what you're doing. I was even having a conversation about consulting companies. If you're starting a data consulting company today, you really have to is this the same as I would do it, say 5 years ago, even?
I don't know. It's a tough question to ask. Certainly being on the VC side now, we spend a lot of time talking to people who are, attempting to build businesses around AI, and certainly our portfolio companies are being transformed by AI. It really is changing so much about what we do that I think I don't know that we've hit the full potential. I'm still surprised to some extent by the amount of people and the amount of companies that aren't properly leveraging it to do the work that they should be doing. So I think it's very much a balancing act. I think it has to be part of kind of the tools that you use on a daily basis. If it's not, you're probably doing something wrong, but I don't think we're at the point yet where it's going to replace kind of human intuition and experience and the things that I think we're really and uniquely good at. Therefore, back to my previous comment, I think it's important to really build kind of a library of personal experiences, whether that's like technology or, just working with people. Because, I don't know if that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, but certainly people are a big piece of the picture in building successful organizations.
Absolutely. And I want to, before we kind of move off of this segment or this topic, you mentioned that your focus primarily has been on technology portfolio-based companies on the VC side. Any particular area on the technology side that you personally or your firm has been more focused on recently?
Yeah, I think there is. So, as I said, Two Bear focuses on this intersection between life sciences, or maybe a better way to say it is about 50% of our firm is focused on life sciences. So, emerging therapeutics from everything to neurodegenerative disease to cancer. Obviously, that's not my specialty or strong suit, but about the other 50% of our portfolio is in technology. And I think within the technology, that's obviously a very, broad a broad space. We're making a lot of investments in security. There aren't our only investments. We've made some investments in the data space and a whole host of other things, AI certainly. But I think where we've spent a good bit of focus when you look at across our tech portfolio is really in the security space, just because as more and more people are doing more and more things online, and certainly with AI and agentic AI and all those things, really understanding and being able to manage the security vulnerabilities across the network is becoming increasingly important. So we're spending quite a bit of time making investments in that space, at least in our tech portfolio.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a fun role. A lot of challenging, interesting problems to help solve, and I'm interested in this too. With all these organizations that you get exposed to, there's got to be a lot of different ways that data architecture is thought about, approached, actually implemented. Everybody has to use data. I mean, I just don't think there's an organization that is not. What are you seeing out there? What are any big shifts? Are there any thematic elements that are kind of coming into play right now that you've seen over the last 2 or 3 years that everybody's taking advantage of?
Well, I think a lot of what I'm seeing are things, different variations of the things you and I have seen for many, many years. But I think, as reflecting on this conversation, I think one of the big changes for me is that the ease at which, people are able to build these kind of pipelines of data and be able to gain insight out of data has really changed in the last couple of years. Back in the day, to do large scale data analytics, you had to invest in technologies like Hadoop, and these were very complicated infrastructures. And a lot of the pipelining and a lot of the movement, from point A to point B had to be kind of rolled your own to some extent. And that was difficult. And so, for small to medium sized businesses, for startups that are just starting, the idea of, building this very sophisticated data infrastructure can be overwhelming. And I think one of the interesting things that's changed in the last couple of years with the introduction of technologies like Fivetran and others is the ease at which people can do some really sophisticated things without having to have kind of full-time people or very, very sophisticated teams of people. Because again, if I'm a Series A company or a seeds company, or really any small to medium-sized business, I may not have the capability to invest in large teams to set up infrastructure to do data and analytics. And I think just the availability of tools that allow you to do that much easier is incredible now. You combine that with now the things that AI can do sitting on top of data if you have access to data. It's a pretty remarkable place, I think, for companies to be. And we're starting to see, and it's certainly one of the things we're looking for, is for companies to be taking advantage of that. If they don't tell a good story about how they're managing their business and outlook with data, that's kind of a red flag. And certainly, that's true on the investment side. But in terms of the work that we do with existing portfolio companies, that's some of where the coaching comes in, is how we can help our companies, take better advantage of the data they have to make better informed decisions about their business.
No, totally agree. Totally agree. What Where do the disconnects typically occur when you're talking about value, you're talking about data, you're talking about what an organization needs, regardless of size? Could be one of your smaller pre-IPO seed Series A companies, could be an enterprise today. Where are the disconnects? What have you seen, I guess, over the years between value and what an enterprise or what a company thinks they need?
Well, I think, when you say disconnect, one of the things I think back to, and I've certainly faced this in many, many times in an organization, is I think, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying, is that these companies tend to be moving so terribly fast. There's always an impending deadline. There's, this stiff competition for resources and time. And what I have observed many times over is that people are often making decisions with incomplete data. They are making a lot of assumptions, and many times, unfortunately, not the world's best assumptions about what they think the data is telling them. And so, you're making important decisions about, maybe where to go from a marketing campaign or other really important decisions, at the business or strategic level, and they're being made without a full picture of data. And I think that's one of the things that I are trying to work a lot with our companies and worked at the past, is helping companies kind of gather data from multiple sources, put them in a single place where we can begin to do some reporting and analytics, and and surface that data in such a way that it becomes part of the decision-making process, kind of in a natural way. Because again, I think people are moving so fast. There's this, this pressure to make a decision, and people tend to just react based on what they think or assume to be true. And I think what I have found is the more we can begin to infuse data into those conversations, the better decisions people are making, the better outcomes we get. But that's been a challenge. Just again, not because people don't necessarily want to. Nobody's going to sit down in a podcast, for example, and say, "No, I don't want to make decisions based on data. That doesn't make sense." Of course, everybody wants to do it, but it's very hard to do it in practice when things are moving so quickly. And I think that's part of the work that we try to do, is just say, let's slow down to ultimately go fast. And by slowing down, what we're going to be doing is analyzing the data we do have and make the best decisions with that data.
Yeah. Well, you've had a couple of things. You and I got connected back up when you reached out on some projects that you had going on internally.
Yep.
And
Sure.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was a Fivetran connector SDK. Most of the time on this podcast, we don't talk about Fivetran specific capabilities or features or anything, but
Right.
I was really interested in your story. This is a relatively new offering for us, and I've been personally really, really excited about this. You say, okay, well, Fivetran, you got 700 plus connectors out of the box. To me, this just opens up thousands and thousands of potential sources. And I'd love to hear from you, Tim. What were the challenges? What happened with you that said, hey, I need to explore building a custom connector, and why Fivetran Connector SDK?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you just a little bit of a highlight of kind of what problem we were trying to solve. And it kind of part and parcel to the things we previously discussed. And we're doing this actually at a couple of our portfolio companies. We're also doing it internally at TwoBear. And that is that, data lives all over the place, as we know. It's tied up in all sorts of different systems, and I'm a firm believer that when you can pull that data out into a single place, you just have the ability to make better, more informed decisions. And I'm not even talking yet about the possibility of pointing AI at things like that. I think there is just tremendous value in taking data across, a handful of key systems that we tend to see time and time again, and putting them in a place where we can do singular analytics. And so the kinds of systems I'm talking about are CRMs, whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce, or in our particular case, Affinity. And then, a whole host of other systems. At our portfolio companies, oftentimes we want to pull data from things like Jira or, ticketing systems, customer success systems. But at TwoBear, I guess I'll use the TwoBear example. In addition to wanting to pull data out of things like Salesforce for fundraising and Affinity for some of our investment stuff, we also wanted to pull data out of tools like Standard Metrics and Carta, which have a lot of interesting information about the health of our portfolio companies. And again, the driver for doing this, sure, I could pull up each individual website and look at a dashboard that each individual one of these tools presents. But what we really wanted to do was take this data out of those systems and make them available so that we could do kind of a single pane of glass, a single series of dashboards in order to do kind of executive level or investor level reporting. And that's kind of a difficult problem to solve. And I didn't want to get in the habit of writing a whole bunch of manual code, which are things I used to do in the past. So Fivetran has been wonderful for some of the more well-known connectors, but where we saw a drop-off was some of the light connectors, and then in places like Carta where no connector existed at all. But we really loved the kind of the pipelining and some of the capability of Fivetran. So you and I got connected, and you introduced me to this idea of, hey, why not just build your own custom connector? And at first I'm thinking, is this really what we should be doing? Turns out it was.
And I remember one of your first questions was, wait, can I do this in Java?
Yeah, I did. I only knew Java when I started this, by the way.
My answer was no, by the way.
Yeah, the answer was no. It's Python only.
I don't think you like that answer too much.
I didn't, but so anyway, after playing around with some of the light connectors and really, investigating and spending a lot of time on what it was we were really trying to get out of these source systems and the way we wanted that data transformed and stored, it seemed to me like building a custom connector was the right way to go. So I, because I was an engineer by trade and still am, forced myself to learn a little bit of Python. But it turns out it was super easy to do. And I'm really glad that we connected on it and I went down that path, because what it's enabled us to do, or me to do, is have incredible now fine-grained control on how the data, how I'm taking data out of these source systems and moving them into, in our particular world internally, our data warehouse is BigQuery. In fact, and maybe I shouldn't share this, but I will. When we were using kind of the out-of-the-box light connectors, based on kind of how they were implemented originally, it was costing us nearly $1,000 a month to pull that data out and store that data. And why? Because it was pulling a lot of data I just simply did not need for the kind of analytics that we did. And so I won't tell you how much we're spending now, but I will say that when I implemented the custom connector, which was very easy to do, I was able to significantly reduce our cost, both on the storage side and the processing side, because I was able to really pull out just what I needed. So very, very simple to do. Since you and I talked, I've built 3 connectors, a Carta connector, an affinity connector for our purposes, and a standard metrics connector, and they're great. And it's been very easy to use, and it's been able to pull exactly what we need, dump it in a way that's easy to interrogate, and now essentially we have a single pane of glass serving our investment professionals. And that data covers everything from our existing investments to our pipeline from both fundraising and investments. So it's been fantastic, and I'm glad we connected. I'm glad you suggested it, and really I'm glad I learned Python. It may be my new favorite language.
That's
I don't know what I'm going to do with it.
Oh no, you're converted. You
yeah.
converted. Okay.
I think it was kind of nice.
Well,
nice not to have to do all that other stuff.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned light connectors. We're talking about connector SDK. Just to set the stage for the audience. So Fivetran has got, call it standard connectors. Think of Salesforce, database connectors, kind of do everything under the sun. And then we have something called light connectors, which really are targeted at a particular use case. These are first-party connectors. Fivetran supports them end-to-end, from interaction with the source all the way through interaction with the destination. What Tim's describing, connector SDK, Tim and team have coded up the source interaction side, how Tim wants to interact, like he said, very specifically with Affinity, Standard Metrics, or Carta. And then Fivetran handles the middle part, any normalization, data typing. I don't know how you built your connector, but Fivetran can infer data types and columns and all that kind of stuff, certainly with destination interactions. So there's a ton of automation. To your point earlier, when you and I were in Hadoop space, everything end-to-end had to be coded up. The source interaction, the middle normalization, all the way through to destination interaction with Hive or HBase or whatever it was. Now you get to really create your own experience almost with the source interaction that you wanted, because as you said, the light connector, for instance, with Affinity, did not do what you wanted it to do, but the rest of everything else is automated. Talk to me a little bit about that only having to do kind of the 1/3 of the work and having Fivetran handle the other 2/3.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And I have some, I have some personal experience with this. I mean, at both my roles at Cockroach and Startree, prior to using Fivetran, I was essentially rolling my own platform for this. So I'm very, very familiar with kind of the work that it takes to kind of write the full stack. I did it in Java, of course, which at the time that was my favorite. But yeah, so there is quite a bit. I mean, you brushed over it, but there is quite a bit that you need to do in order to kind of orchestrate this data movement if you're building it truly yourself from end to end. So the nice thing about the API that you have via the connector is that it shields you from a lot of that nasty complexity and allows you to focus really on what specific things do I want to pull from an API and how do I want to store that, and all that other complexity is shielded from you, and that's actually pretty important. So it really allowed me to focus on the things that matter, which is what APIs from these systems do I want to consume, how do I want to, if at all, transform that data into something useful, and then just kind of pushing that down, not even really being terribly specific about how it's pushed down. By the way, the connector has some really nice capabilities there. It's just like essentially update here's a JSON record. So it's made it very, very easy to do, and yes, has enabled me to essentially implement one Python file as opposed to a very, very complex Spring Boot project, which did the whole kit and caboodle. That was fun to write, by the way, but yeah, from a maintenance perspective, it's not the easiest in the world.
This also is, as you continue to grow the team, I would think from a maintenance perspective, maybe refactor, whatever needs to happen at that source interaction side with Affinity or Carta or any other connectors that you develop, should be a little bit easier to pick up too, especially since I just have to deal with this one piece, not the end to end.
Yeah, and there's something that that maybe others can appreciate, and I certainly have, is part of it too. It has to do with kind of, I think, the sophistication of the team around you, or the skill set at the people who might be consuming the data model that ultimately ends up in your data warehouse. And what I mean by that is I have observed that a number of the APIs that I'm working with, some are more complex than others. And I think you kind of have two choices as an SDK developer or a Fivetran SDK developer. Is do I take this complexity from the API source system and just kind of pass that right on through into the data warehouse or wherever my data store and let somebody else worry about it? Or do I begin to kind of reshape the data as I'm pulling it from these APIs into something that's a little simpler? And I chose to do the latter. Partially because I'm not the world's greatest SQL expert, but it seemed easier to me to do a bunch of transformations kind of at the connector stage. Now, this may fly in the face of some, best practices and paradigms that you guys talk about, but not all APIs are created the same. And so what I tried to do is simplify a little bit as I was taking some of this data and making it, making ultimately a much easier to consume schema on the data side, so that my consumers didn't have to write uber sophisticated SQL in order to consume the data, but could operate with a data model that was a little bit more sensible. So that's one of the things I really appreciated about kind of implementing the custom connector, is it gave me a lot of flexibility, I think, to kind of dictate how sophisticated my downstream consumers needed to be.
Yeah, I love that. Great story. Let me transition just a little bit. It could be on the topics we've already talked about, but just interested in some personal perspectives. Any lessons learned, kind of the running into brick wall type thing maybe that you've had, or maybe better experiences in that over the years that could apply to, you're talking one-on-one with a data leader today. What are those 1, 2, or 3 things that you go, these are the things that I learned that I would either not want to repeat or always repeat?
I think I touched on it earlier, and this is something I see a lot of organizations struggle with. I don't think there's any grand revelation here. It's that it's never too early to start collecting and analyzing data. I get this pushback sometimes, and I've been part of organizations that push back on this. We're not big enough. We haven't, we only have, a handful of opportunities or a handful of customers or whatever. The excuses are kind of the same. And I just remember at the early days at Cockroach, or maybe not so, kind of the middle days after we'd been there a few years. I remember we had not done a particularly great job of collecting some of that data early on. And I remember thinking, if we could just go back and begin to collect some of the things that we forgot to collect or didn't collect, how much more valuable would our data set be now? How many lessons could we avoid relearning, by having access to some of those, those loss reasons or whatever the details were. So that's one thing I really work with teams on is I know it feels like maybe it's the cart before the horse. I know maybe there's this idea that we're asking you to, implement process or tooling that is better suited for a company that's later stage. But this is time you can't get back. This is data you can't get back. And there can be tremendous value in capturing and analyzing this data now. And I think that's something that we learned the hard way at a couple of organizations, quite honestly. So that's one of the big ones that I really push on is let's absolutely take the time to do this right now. You will thank me later.
Oh, it's fantastic. Great advice. What about, obviously we've hit on AI a lot today. Any other emerging trends, whether it's in data, whether it's in the PE space, or whether it's in this this intersection that you're working in with tech and life sciences that you see trend-wise emerging, especially as it might relate to data leaders to help them prepare as we continue to roll through 2025?
Well, security is going to continue to be incredibly important. Data security, as we move away from human identity, from a security perspective, and introduce more non-human identities into the picture, agents and things like that. Companies are really going to need to have an understanding of who's doing what in their systems, and that who may not be a person, it may be an agent. And so I think one of the things that we're looking at very seriously is how do we secure this future in which, the people that are interacting with the systems, may be very, very ephemeral, and may not be human at all. And what does that really look like and mean? So I think security continues to be important, but also, just monitoring. AI costs are going to continue to rise. And with any new and emerging technology, it takes enterprises a while to get a handle on things like spend. How much am I spending? Where am I spending? Am I getting real value? And so we're looking at ways that that we can help companies keep an eye on those things, because I think that's going to be interesting. AI is going to transform so many businesses. How exactly and when is yet to be seen, but we think it's going to be absolutely transformational. And so the things that we can invest in that help secure data now and those environments in the future are going to be pretty important, we think.
I love that. Tim, fantastic getting to catch up a little bit today. Thank you so much for joining the show. I really, really appreciate it.
It was great to be here. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And definitely let's stay in touch on everything that you're doing at Two Bear. I want to hear about those next 5 or 6 connectors that you build out as well.
You'll be the first to know.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who listened in today. We really appreciate each one of you. We'd encourage you to subscribe to the podcast at any of the major platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google. You can also find us on YouTube. Visit us at fivetran.com/podcast. And please send us any feedback or comments at podcast@fivetran.com. We'd love to hear from you. See you soon. Take care.